I thought it was time for another talk video. So this is not a pen review, I'm just talking about pens. And the particular question came from my friend Ron, who emailed me after I had uploaded my What Are You Taking to Work video. That was a series I hadn't done in a while, but I showed pens that I inked up and that I'm taking to work. The title seems fairly self-explanatory. Now, Ron emailed me and said I enjoyed that video. And then, which I always appreciate, because I mean, at the end of the day, I make the videos for the viewers, so if people don't enjoy it, there's no point in making those videos. So I appreciate that feedback. And then he said, I think another presentation that would also be very interesting is how you use those pens at work. For example, do you use the pen with red ink to grade your students' papers? So I think that is a very good idea to address a little bit, and it may also address another question that I get quite a lot, which is, what do you use your pens for? How do you use your pens? Like, in general, what I have fountain pens, I don't know what to use them for. Let's take this one step at a time. Just to be absolutely sure you understand what my work entails, I'm an instructor at a post-secondary post-secondary institution. So I teach psychology to undergraduate students. And as a result, I find that I use my pens actually quite a lot. I use them a lot at work, and I go through a reasonable amount of ink. So I'll start off by saying the most use those pens see is in meetings. Meetings are part of many jobs, and I am a chair at this point in time. So I have more meetings than I've ever had, for different parts, different reasons, different parts of the institution with different people. The reason I say that is I do not necessarily color code meetings. So it's not that every meeting with the dean is brown ink or something. I don't do that. I do like to use different pens for different meetings, and the reason for that is that I typically have different ink colors in the different pens I bring to work. And subsequently, when I use a notebook, which I do in a Wancher leather notebook cover, I can immediately see where one meeting ended and another started, because the color of the ink changes. And I don't have a particular system for that notebook or anything. It's just something I like, and that's one of the reasons I like to have different pens with different inks at work. At some point, I started a notebook and I used B.R.E brown ink exclusively in it, because it's my ink, and I thought it would be fun to have a whole notebook with the same ink. And it was fun. The only problem with it was I had no idea of seeing where one meeting ended and the other started. So for me, that was a bit of an issue. If you have a lot of meetings, then that is a great way to use your pens. And the color, therefore, to me, is meaningful, not because it differentiates the content of different meetings, but it demarcates meetings. So there you are. That's one reason, that's one way I use my fountain pens at work. Probably the most profound way I use my fountain pens at work. As I have said in the past, I like to have one somewhat neutral ink color in it, because sometimes I do have to sign something, and it's not always appropriate to sign things in hot pink or something. So that is another consideration. So my ink, B.R.E brown, I consider a neutral enough color to be able to sign things, but sometimes it has to be blue or black. I don't always have black ink in a pen, but I tend to have at least one pen with a blue ink in it. Whether that is a washable blue, whether that is a royal blue, whether that is something like Iroshizuku Konpeki, which is a very vibrant blue that I really like a lot. But you always have something that is somewhat neutral. This is in no way meant as a morbid thing to say, but there was a time, I remember, not here, but in the Netherlands when I was doing my PhD, I had to sign a card for someone who had a family member that suddenly passed away. Such a card, it would be very strange to sign that with sort of a neon green, really outstanding color. So for that case, that experience taught me always have a pen with a neutral ink in it, because you never know what you may have to sign. I kind of touched upon that, I think, in that What Do You Take It to Work video. I also like to have different nibs, just because sometimes it's fun to put in a signature with a broader nib so it stands out more, right? And sometimes you have to fill out a little form, and then a fine nib can be much more helpful. So I do try to take that into account, and when I choose pens to take to work, I try to pick pens that have different nibs on them for that specific reason. So the meetings, I would say, signing things is the main way the pens see use. And I like to take a lot of notes during meetings. And the reason for that, there's the obvious reason of you can go back to see what you have discussed. Another reason for me is I find that when I take notes, I pay attention more and I store the meeting better in my brain when I'm also taking notes, because you're thinking about what to write down. So for me, that is another important aspect of taking meetings, and I don't like to use laptops for that. I know we live in a digital age, and I know digital is important, but I prefer handwritten notes by far. Computers crash, USB drives. I once lost a USB drive with all my teaching materials on them. Fortunately, I had a backup, but still, I understand a handwritten note can get lost too. It can catch fire, can it? But I haven't ever had a notebook spontaneously combust. So there is that. And yes, then there is grading. Now, grading to me, grading papers these days for me is mainly done digitally. We have a learning management system. Students submit their papers online through that, and you can leave comments digitally on their papers. So most of that work is done not on paper. However, there are two exceptions. One is basically every year I supervise a student research project. These are final year students who are doing independent research under our supervision. I supervise a student. They write much longer papers because they have a full year to conduct their research, and you get something at the end that can be dozens of pages. With such a long paper, I'm kind of old-fashioned, and I like to have a print copy, which I then provide feedback on in a handwritten sense. And there are two things I do with that. One is I write comments in the actual paper, and I tend to write a kind of summative report, either on the front page or the final page, wherever there's space, to give the students some thoughts. So I think this went really well, and I think this was a very clear and well-written piece. I think this needs some revision. We need to think a little bit about how we're going to do that. Like that sort of stuff in a summative way, so that students can also see what went well and what did not go so well. I think that's important, because if you hand something back to students with a lot of written feedback, which I tend to do, because you mark grammar and you mark spelling and you also mark, for me, the fluidity of sentences, how well the paper reads beyond the actual content. So you can get you can get a paperback where every page has maybe 15 or 20 handwritten scribbled things on it, and that can be very overwhelming. So I like to discuss that with a student, not just give it back, but invite them, sit down, discuss it, and then first go through those summative comments, so that that's the first thing they see, and that way the rest hopefully is a little less, let's just say, oppressive or overwhelming than would otherwise be. So that's one exception to handwritten feedback, and I'll get to the ink color, but I first want to finish this thought. The other thing that happens is exams. Some exams are written digitally, but a lot of my exams are handwritten still, so it's multiple choice, and there's open-ended questions. And on those open-ended questions, I also like to give some feedback, not an awful lot, because if you have to make it through 40, 80, 90 exams, there's not a lot of time to give a lot of feedback, but I do try to give some feedback. And I do that in handwriting. And for that, I like to use my ink. And the reason I like to use my ink is that it's my ink. It's not a matter of ego, it's a matter of it's an outstanding color. So A, I can immediately see where I wrote something, and it's set apart from the student's writing. And B, it's not so easy to tamper with, because you would need to get my ink, would you? So when I write down marks, you can't tamper with that. Now, this is not to think the worst of students, but it's just a matter of, to me, that's an additional sort of layer of security that I put into that. With papers, that's a little different. I try my best to not use red ink when I grade. Sometimes my other pens have run out of ink, and that's what I have, but I try not to. And that idea came to me through a German teacher, Mr. van Noordwijk, in high school. He always used green ink when he graded our, for German it was mainly letters that we had to write, but also exams. And he didn't use red. Almost all other teachers use red ink to grade. And at some point, a student asked him about that and said, why do you always use green? He used green fine liners. And he said, because when I mark something and give you feedback, I don't want you to look at it as something you've done wrong, but something you can improve. So it's not red is wrong, it's green because it's something to improve. And I have really always liked that sentiment. I'm sure he was not the inventor of it, and there's even studies published on it, on how red ink is maybe not the best color. People associate that with alarm and all kinds of sort of bad things. But it was that teacher's clear explanation and thinking process that I really appreciated. He was also a good teacher, by the way, but that kind of stuck with me. If you can avoid the bright red ink, which it is tempting because it also stands out, it's easy to see, I think you should try. And so I try to not use that. And I've actually had some positive comments from students who said, you know, that when I got that paper back, there was a lot of feedback and it looked a little scary, but at least it wasn't red ink. So it didn't look terrifying from that perspective. So I think that works pretty well. And I think that's to me, that was a very important thing. So to answer Ron's question, no, I don't use red ink for grading if I can help it. Hopefully that's a somewhat interesting insight. So that's how I use the pens. And the final thing I wanted to say, because this is a question I really get with some regularity, is how do you use your pens? Because I have a number of pens now and I just don't know how to use them. There you go. If you sit in a meeting, take handwritten notes. Take that leap. It doesn't always have to be digital. I understand we have emails. I was corresponding with someone who actually hand wrote all their emails, scanned it, sent it to people. I don't have time for that. I just don't have the time. I like the idea, I don't have the time. But a meeting notes, take them by hand, see what happens. Use it in everyday life too. If I make a grocery list, it's written with a fountain pen. Because I have these pens, why would I not use them for that? It's a menial task, it's not an elevated special thing, it's just, why not? And it worked too. Anything I can write, I do. When we were doing a lot of online teaching during the pandemic, I even sometimes did some hand drawings on video, and I would always use fountain pens, different colors, easy to, brain stuff or whatever, statistic stuff. You can do that. There are many opportunities. You just have to seize them. And that's what you have your pens for, right? So, that's it. I hope this was somewhat interesting. And I'll gladly see you later. Bye!